Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 16th, 2023. Well, I've got a lot to say. I just finished an article on the period from June 10th, 1963 until the assassination on November 22nd of John F. Kennedy and his battle for peace. This article will probably be posted on the LaRouche Organization website on my blog page sometime over the weekend, but it's really quite important because we've been emphasizing the significance of the June 10th speech of Kennedy, and that was not a one-off event. He continued a mobilization from then to the end of his life to bring the principles that he was talking about, a vision of peace, peace for the whole world, and not just the absence of war or the peace enforced by U.S. arms, but a peace that could be sustained through dialogue and economic development. And I think it's urgent that we take seriously that we had a president at one point who was fighting for this vision and was inspiring the people of his time and should be inspiring the people of our time with that vision. Because the importance of these kinds of historical events is that they are part of a living memory of a nation. Without that, if you wipe out these moments of singular courage and optimism, you leave a nation rudderless and subject to the control by a criminal cabal of so-called elitists who use the nation to benefit their private interests. And what Kennedy was doing with his June 10th speech and then the period to the end of his life was fighting to remove the world from a division between two blocs that were antagonistic, that were fighting, and that had no way out. And the people who killed him intended to make sure that that vision was not realized. Now, Lyndon LaRouche pointed out that the one flaw with Kennedy's approach was that he did this as a kind of cabinet warfare, that he did not go public with the fight he was waging against those in his administration and outside his administration who wanted to sustain the military confrontation, the standoff, under the mutual and assured destruction doctrine between the US and the Soviet Union. In particular, he was hamstrung by having people like Averell Harriman, one of the old evil Eastern establishment figures, as an advisor. The military people that were involved around him, the Dulles network, Alan Dulles, who he had to fire after the Bay of Pigs. What was the problem for Kennedy was his concern that he couldn't win an election if he pursued peace, that he would be labeled soft on communism, a coward. He didn't stand up for our rights and the rights of the Cuban people at the Bay of Pigs. He backed down under the threat from Khrushchev in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and on and on and on. Kennedy was well aware of this. He was fighting against this conception the whole time. How do you extricate the United States from Vietnam without being labeled a coward? Now, that brings up the question for today of what kind of statesmanship is required when we're in a confrontation with Russia. That is, when I say we, I mean NATO, the United States, the European countries. A confrontation with Russia, which is based on a complete absurd premise, which is the defense of Ukrainian freedom and democracy. Where was Ukrainian democracy when we overthrew the elected government in 2014? Where is Ukrainian freedom when Zelensky is shutting down all opposition press and political movements? And where is this idea of defending a nation when we're sending the bulk of its male population to death in a meat grinder war that's main purpose is to weaken Russia? So where are the statesmen? Biden, Blinken, Nuland, Sullivan? They're not statesmen. They're salesmen of an idea called the rules-based order, which is essentially to make the billionaires rich and the rest of us poor. Sunak, the follower of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. I mean, you look at this line of succession, it's down, down, down. And it's no wonder that the United Kingdom is suffering the way it is, the people of the United Kingdom. Look at Scholz and Baerbock in Germany. Look at the three-faced Macron in France. Now, in the US, what do we see? We've got an election coming up. And the same forces that intervened in 2016 to undermine the presidency of Donald Trump are at it again. And when I say undermine the presidency of Trump, the whole Russiagate story was a fraud. It was designed to prevent the United States from achieving agreements with Russia that would have prevented a Ukraine war from happening and that would have created the basis for prosperous, mutual, beneficial relations. And instead, we had a witch hunt. And I use the term not to defend Trump's use of the term, but there was nothing. As the Durham report shows, the FBI had no basis for launching Russiagate from the beginning. And the attempts to continue the legal attacks on Donald Trump, while others who had did the same thing, like Biden with his documents, Pence with his documents, Hillary Clinton with not only her documents, but talking about obstruction of justice, trying to destroy the cell phone and erase records and so on. Is that not obstruction? So do we have a justice system that targets only one group of people? Well, we know that. We saw what happened to LaRouche. Talk about persecution. A single-minded effort by both parties under the direction of people like Henry Kissinger, William Weld, and Robert Mueller, targeting LaRouche in the 1980s, calling him a Soviet agent, a fascist, an anti-Semite. What was his crime? He was fighting for an American ideal, fighting for justice, fighting for economic justice, not just for the United States, but for the world. So for those who ask me, who should I support for president? You look at Trump, you look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's being ignored or smeared by the mainstream press, and these represent candidacies that are not acceptable to the establishment, but they don't rise up to the level of what's needed. What's needed is real statesmanship of the sort that was presented by Kennedy in his June 10th speech, and as you'll see from my article, in the battles he waged after June 10th, which led to his assassination by the very people he was fighting inside his cabinet and his administration. So where do you find hope if you can't find it in the U.S., the assorted candidates running for president? What has to come from you? It's the citizens who make our government function when it does function. And you have to know what's right and what's wrong and what can be done. That's one of the reasons that I do these updates, to give you a picture of what's really going on in the world out of the shadows that are cast upon it by the mainstream media, which are designed to convince you there's no alternative but Biden or DeSantis. Now, the reality here is that there's a fight being waged against the evildoers. And I use that term literally because the people we're fighting, whether it's the World Economic Forum, the Bilderbergers, the Trilaterals, the banksters, the central bankers and others, the green extremists, they are doing evil. They're committed to policies which will harm the majority of the human race if it doesn't make us extinct through nuclear war. So how do you fight them? You need a citizens movement. You need to know what's going on, what the fight is, what the battle lines are. And right now, the most significant battle is not the Russian fight in Ukraine, although that's an important one, and we have to move to end it by demanding that NATO stop the flow of weapons and that there be negotiations to give legitimate security to Russia and to Ukraine. But beyond that, look at what's happening in Asia and in the nations of the global south. They're waging a fight for the hopes and future of their children, of an economic development perspective, of a break with the unipolar order, of NATO enforcement of the demands of the Western bankers. And there's incredible motion on this, and we've identified it over the last couple of days with the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, where thousands of businessmen from all over the world are showing up in St. Petersburg to speak with the Russians. Is that isolation? You know, Blinken should be hanging his head in shame, except I think he's shameless. Well, what about the development of the BRICS? It's been announced that Egypt's application is likely to be accepted as the next BRICS member. And today, the president of Algeria is in Moscow for meetings, and he's submitting his request to become a member of the BRICS. There are now up to 30 nations that want to join the BRICS. Who doesn't want to join the BRICS? The countries of Western Europe and the United States and the Five Eyes. People like Trudeau, people like Biden, who are trying to crush the BRICS. Why? To preserve the unipolar order based on Wall Street and the City of London. So I would simply say that we have to make the issue real economic development, not austerity. Science and technology, not feudalism. This idea of democracy versus autocracy from people who are carrying out coups against democratically elected governments, this is an absurdity. So those of us who know something about this, become armed with the truth. Make sure you speak out boldly. That's what our site is for, to give you ideas, to give you the intelligence that's being kept from you by the censorship, the disinformation industrial complex, as I call it. So we have this weekend on Saturday, the Manhattan Project, we're going to have a further discussion of the significance and implications of Kennedy's June 10th speech. That'll be available at theLaroucheOrganization.com. I'd urge you to join us. Go to our websites and just scroll through them and see the kind of material that we have there, and you'll get a real sense of why LaRouche was such a target of this evil empire for so many years. So thanks for joining me. I'll be back again next week. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche Organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.